Hi Guy, welcome back. Why on our spoilers? Young and the Restless spoilers reveal that rumors of another tragedy are hanging over Genoa City like a heavy fog, and Sienna is once again in the eye of the storm after the truth about Mitch Buell is gradually revealed. The darkness named Matt Clark seems to come back to life, more sinister, more unpredictable and ready to strike back at any time. Sienna knows better than anyone that she has gone too far into a game that she no longer has control over. Fear is no longer a vague feeling, but becomes a pressure that weighs on every breath, especially when she realizes that Matt may have discovered the forbidden relationship between her and Noah, and that he may also be the one behind the accident that almost took Noah's life in panic and despair. Sienna may think of Nick as the only way out, a man rational enough, strong enough and loving enough to protect Noah from Matt's rage, but in asking Nick for help, she is forced to face a truth she has long tried to avoid: her betrayal, her wrong choices, and the risk of dragging the Newman family into an unpredictable spiral of danger. Meanwhile, Matt Clark does not stop under the guise of Mitch Buell. He continues to launch new moves, cold and ruthless, as if each incident that occurs is just part of a pre-calculated plan. Sienna, in an inevitable turn of events, will face the risk of being arrested, becoming the focus of investigation amid accusations, suspicions, and public pressure. At the same time, Victor Newman unexpectedly chooses to face his dark side when he confesses the things he has hidden, the decisions he once believed were necessary to protect his family. Nikki is forced to look at her husband with a different, sharper, and more cautious eye. Victor's confession is not just a personal detail, but also a warning bell. Every mistake, every calculation, whether in the name of love or power, is contributing to fueling chaos. Secrets, instead of being buried, rise to the surface at the same time, intertwining, colliding, creating a chain of unpredictable consequences for all involved in that chaotic picture. Sienna can hardly leave Noah's hospital room, not because of duty, but because Noah has become the only support left to keep her from completely collapsing. Every time she stands in front of the hospital bed looking at the wounds on his body, she is torn between two opposing emotions: sincere love for Noah and the obsession that this relationship has triggered Matt's madness, accidentally dragging Noah into danger. Sienna is afraid of the possibility that Mitch has guessed everything, afraid that Noah is not just the victim of a simple accident, but the target of a cruel revenge plan. That fear makes her unable to leave, unable to turn away, unable to pretend she is just a bystander. At the same time, Sienna cannot ignore the fact that in this war, Noah is not only physically injured, but also caught in the middle of deeper conflicts involving his own family. As the identity of Mitch Buell is attached to the name Matt Clark. As the accusations and investigations become more and more intense, Sienna understands that it is not just a sinful love triangle. She worried about what was happening to Nick and Sharon, about the family Noah was raised in, about the secrets that, if exposed, could destroy everything. The guilt made Sienna not only afraid for herself, but also felt like she was dragging Noah's family to the brink. In a moment of weakness amid the anxiety-filled hospital atmosphere, Noah, though physically and emotionally damaged, still tried to reassure Sienna. He gave her a heavy kiss, not just the familiar tenderness, but also a silent affirmation that he chose her, that in the midst of this chaos, he still believed in their bond, but the kiss was not between the two of them. Nick Newman, standing nearby, had accidentally witnessed it all in an instant, all the doubts, all the vague premonitions about the strange change in Noah's behavior, suddenly had an explanation. He did not want to accept the image of his son kissing a woman who was supposed to belong to another man. A dangerous man like Matt Clark hit Nick like a blow. He didn't just see a kiss. He saw an unspoken confession. He saw the door open to a whole new set of dangers. After that, Nick was forced to face Noah and Sienna directly. The encounter didn't explode into a loud argument, but the moment was suffocatingly tense. Nick wanted to hear the truth, wanted to know the reason, wanted to understand why his son chose to enter such a complicated and dangerous relationship. However, what he received in return was not clear confessions, but silence, evasive looks, half-hearted sentences that didn't explain anything. Sienna and Noah were like two people trying to protect each other, but in that effort, they accidentally pushed Nick out, leaving him with hundreds of unanswered questions, and that was what made Nick's head ache the most. As a father, Nick was not just angry or disappointed, he was afraid. He saw his son drifting too far from the safe limits, standing too close to the abyss that Matt Clark was setting. He tried to piece together the scattered pieces of information, the accident, the appearance of Mitch Sienna's unusual emotions, the kiss in the hospital, the silence between them. Every detail was a warning sign that Noah was entering a dangerous area that he himself was not fully aware of. Nick wanted to intervene, wanted to protect, wanted to pull Noah back before it was too late. But things were no longer as simple as saying, "I will listen. I promise to listen." This was a maze of love, guilt, hatred, and intrigue, where every wrong step could be paid for in blood in the coming days, as Matt continues to be a looming threat, as Sienna faces the risk of being targeted or seen as an accomplice, as Victor confesses his dark side, and Nikki must always be on guard. The atmosphere in Genoa City will become even more suffocating. There is no need for any more absurd events to make things more dramatic, because the internal conflicts, the unspoken secrets, the choices of being cornered, are enough to push all the characters into an extremely dangerous zone. Sienna does not know if she can survive at all. Noah does not know if he is in love with the right person or is becoming a pawn. Nick does not know whether to protect his son by holding on or forcing himself to let go, to face the truth, and in all of that, a question hangs that no one dares to answer. Is the upcoming tragedy inevitable, or is there still time to save it before another death occurs in the shadow of Matt Clark? Sensed that something was wrong even before it became clear. The presence of Mitch Buck all around her and those she loved was like a cold mist hanging in the air without any concrete evidence, but enough to make her intuition scream. Matt always appeared polite with smooth explanations, intentionally friendly smiles. But the more Sharon interacted, the more she saw behind him a darkness that he tried to hide. The feeling of unease tightened, no longer a vague worry, but a clear fear that she and her family might be standing very close to a dangerous person in a moment when she could no longer ignore her premonition. Sharon was forced to do what she always did when she felt darkness approaching. She called Nick. It wasn't a weak act, it was a protective reflex, a cry for help to the man she trusted most when it came to her own safety and the safety of her loved ones. Sharon didn't need to hide the panic in her voice when she told Nick what was going on about how Matt had made her feel threatened, even though he hadn't reached any specific boundaries. She needed Nick to be there, not just to rescue her from an uncomfortable situation, but also to be a practical anchor to help her not be fooled by the false facade Matt was trying to build for Sharon. This wasn't just a fear for herself. It was the first warning of a storm that might be coming. It was also a turning point inside Sharon. She no longer wanted to be put on the defensive. No longer wanted to continue to endure the feeling of being watched, manipulated, or having her sanity tested. The more she thought about Mitch, the more she connected the unusual signs, the details that didn't match in his story, and a familiar name she never wanted to hear again. Matt Clark. Sharon knew that if her hunch was right, she couldn't let this go as an unfounded suspicion. She had to prepare for a real confrontation, one strong enough to tear down his mask. In the future, there would definitely be another fierce encounter between them, but this time, Sharon wouldn't be the victim being cornered, but the one who actively pushed the other person into a corner. She would look straight at Mitch Bacall, not avoid it, not let him lead the conversation, but force him to face what he was hiding, force him to reveal his flaws, force him to admit his true identity. She knew too well what kind of person Matt was. The more exposed he was, the more reckless he became. But that was no longer enough to make her hesitate in response. Mitchell continued to stick to his role, firmly denying all accusations. He will not lose his composure immediately. On the contrary, he will become even calmer, emphasizing that Sharon and Nick were exaggerating, that they were looking at everything through the prism of their painful past. He will use those memories as a sophisticated weapon, making Sharon appear to others as overreacting because of old obsessions in the eyes of outsiders. Mitch will still be a man trying to appear innocent, unjustly suspected, but to Sharon, that calmness only makes him more dangerous. She understands that the more a person tries to prove his innocence with smooth arguments, the more he knows why he is being scrutinized, and that is why Sharon is determined not to let the story stop at the level of suspicion. She began to see this as a real mission, a commitment to herself that she would expose Matt's plot to the end, not just because of the hurt in the past, but because the present and future of those she loved were at stake if he continued to have free reign. Sharon was no longer just the woman who had been deceived. She was the only one who saw the full picture of this danger, and she would not let anyone repeat what she had experienced. She decided to use sobriety, experience, and the desire to protect her family as weapons, instead of letting fear guide her. That toughness did not make her anxiety disappear, but gave it a purpose. She knew that Matt was the type of person who would not give up easily. His sinister behavior would not stop just because he was suspected. On the contrary, it would escalate when he felt threatened. As time went on, the warning signs around him would become clearer: double words, calculating, looks, inexplicable coincidences, little by little, adding up to a dark picture. Sharon knew that every step Matt took could be part of a larger plan, and she had to stay one step ahead of him if she wanted to protect the people she cared about. This is no longer just a private matter between Sharon and Matt, but a vital line between safety and disaster for a whole circle of loved ones who are being dragged into it. In the process, Sharon may continuously receive new information, fragments of the terrifying things surrounding Matt's identity and conspiracy. Every call, every warning, every seemingly small detail becomes a weight on her heart, confirming that she was right not to ignore her initial hunch. But at the same time, those updates also prove that the threat is becoming more serious, that everything can get out of control at any time if she is not steadfast enough. Sharon does not allow herself to fall halfway. Her fear is no longer a fear to run away, but a fear that forces her to stand up and fight, because she knows very well that if she backs down, Matt will step forward. She knows she is not alone with Nick by her side, but also knows that no one can face this past for her. The journey to expose Matt is not only a thrilling plot, but also a test of Sharon's mettle, whether she is strong enough to see it through, knowing that what lies ahead is more horrifying truths, more painful choices, and a potential trade-off far greater than she could have ever imagined. And as this plot continues to unfold, viewers can see
Sharon
one
is
thing
no
clearly:
longer
a woman who lets the darkness control her. She is a woman who looks it straight in the eye, names it, and is willing to pay the price to ensure that Matt Clark, whatever name he goes by, will never have the chance to hurt the people she loves again. Phyllis Summers always knew that every game with Victor Newman was a double-edged sword, but she still hoped she was clever enough not to become a pawn to be sacrificed. Then, the moment Victor laid the final evidence on the table, all the disguises she had tried to build began to crack. With no way back, no arguments enough to bend the truth, Phyllis was forced to face the reality that she had been forced into a dark corner where every choice brought losses. Victor did not need to raise his voice, did not need to make loud threats. The coldness in his eyes, the way he calmly listed every detail he knew, was enough to stifle any resistance from her. He not only knew about the business deal between them, but also had in his hands enough evidence to make Phyllis a guilty person in the eyes of the law and public opinion. Facing Victor in that situation, Phyllis was no longer the shrewd woman who knew how to turn the situation around, but someone who was tightly gripped by her own game, knowing that any denial would only make things worse. She could not run away, could not pretend to be innocent, because Victor had long been ahead of her. He had come not to negotiate further, but to remind her that the game was over and she was not the one who held the power of life and death. The argument between Victor and Phyllis became tense in the very typical way of two people who knew each other too well, not just words, but a series of psychological attacks where each sentence was hidden behind a layer of intimidation. Phyllis tried to retain her dignity and voice, objecting, questioning, repeating that she had not wanted things to go this far. But Victor did not soften. He reminded her that once she had entered into an agreement with Newman, she could not use the excuse of not intentionally to shirk responsibility. She had taken advantage, had gotten involved, and now she had to face the consequences. At that moment, the sounds from the living room echoed outside, making the already tense atmosphere in the Newman mansion even heavier. Nikki Newman, who was sensitive to every movement in this house, could not ignore the harsh voices, the broken and frustrated conversations coming from downstairs. A feeling of unease urged Nikki to walk down the stairs. Each step seemed to bring with it a premonition that she was about to witness something that Victor had long tried to keep hidden. When she appeared, Nikki not only saw the two people confronting each other, but also immediately felt the wave of secrets rolling between them. Her eyes moved from Victor to Phyllis, realizing that both of them were tense, defensive, as if they had just crossed a line that could not be easily returned. Nikki's appearance changed the color of the air in an instant. Victor was to choose between continuing to hide or facing the fact that his wife was starting to ask questions. Phyllis, with her survival instinct, knew that anything she said now could be twisted, so she kept quiet, letting Victor handle it. And Victor, in that moment, chose to face it. He admitted to Nikki that he had a business deal with Phyllis, a confession that made Nikki's eyes immediately turn cold and defensive. Nikki was no stranger to Victor's shady plans, but what bothered her was not just the fact that he was hiding it from her, but the nature of what was being hidden. The way Victor spoke, the way Phyllis dodged all gave Nikki the feeling that this was not just a simple business deal, but a piece in a deeper, more dangerous strategy. She had a bad feeling about this, an intuition honed over years of accompanying Victor in countless power battles. Nikki knew Victor never partnered with anyone without an agenda that went beyond the numbers on paper. And when she heard about Cain Ashby and his AI program being involved, the pieces in her head started to fit together. It didn't take long for Nikki to realize that Victor had used Cain's technology as a weapon. While Phyllis may not have wanted things to get so brutal, and while she may have vaguely noticed and flinched, Victor had been the one who had actively used the AI program to turn the tables on him. He had used Cain's own creation against him, putting Cain in a position where he was threatened, facing the collapse of his own system. It was a cold, precise move typical of Newman, and one that Nikki couldn't continue to see as just a business strategy for all the hurt, mistakes, and hatred she had witnessed. Nikki had little sympathy for Cain, the threats, the shady behavior, the times he was willing to trample on others for his own benefit were all too obvious. So the fact that he had to face the consequences, the fallout from his own programming, wasn't what bothered Nikki. She didn't mind if that was the price he had to pay after all, but what bothered Nikki was something else. Victor rarely stopped after knocking out an opponent. He was always looking ahead, always calculating the next step, always identifying the next victim before the current one fell. As she listened to Victor talk about using AI, listened to the way he analyzed, reasoned, justified, Nikki began to understand that this wasn't just a battle with Cain. This was a pattern, a method, an attack strategy he was applying, and that made her deeply worried about the next target. The confrontation between Victor and Phyllis inadvertently becomes a revelation moment for Nikki, giving her a clearer view of what is being orchestrated behind the scenes. And from that moment on, the question is no longer what will Cain pay, but what will Victor do next, and who will be next to pay the price for his ambition. In the midst of these thoughts, Nikki knows that the real storm is still ahead, and it could come crashing down on people she doesn't want to see hurt again. Nick.